Hello. Hello. I'm here 1 minute late. All right. Let me get some going real quick. The event. I have a new toy. um, Take me one more second. Get it running. All right. Almost there. And restart something real quick. This is done, but I spent some time on it this week, so I want to use it. You guys will see in just a second what I'm talking about. And then I'm gonna get oh, excuse me. Came out of nowhere. Yeah, I'm Pete Mohrbacher. I am a traditional artist. I work digitally, and one sec. And now I know I need to restart. Okay. Got it. Okay. I work digitally, and so I'm gonna do a little digital painting demo for you guys here to show you how to do it the old-fashioned way in Photoshop. All right. So let's just get Photoshop up. There we are. Virtual cam. Then I share it here. OBS virtual camera. There we go. So instead of doing the screen share, this is maybe what we should have done the whole time. I realized, like back when we were having trouble with the technology right off the beginning, they added screen share for us to be able to do this. I realized at some point, once I got into doing some streaming on Twitch recently, and I discovered that you can do a virtual camera through OBS that feeds out into the thing, which allows me to customize what gets seen on the camera. For instance, I've got my VTuber here now. So I've got a little avatar on screen. You can see wiggle around and like moves his mouth along with me and stuff. So I've got my VTuber avatar so that I can be fully professional about this whole thing. So yeah, that's my extra little thing I've got today. Thank you all for joining me. So today I'm planning on doing a digital study of a photo. And then I was live streaming earlier, and I've got a different skull looking guy over here. He's got some similarities, I think, to my avatar, but he's all cyber and stuff. So I'm gonna do a quick walkthrough on how I build like a concept doodle like this. I've also got a work in progress of a new painting that I can give you a tour up and down and show you what I'm doing as far as PSD is concerned over there. And then I'm going to do a live study, and over the course of the next 2 hours, I'm going to make a brand new fresh painting from scratch and show you what it takes to be able to put together a digital painting done manually in Photoshop, and and how you can do it yourself at home, theoretically. So I have been churning through these. This is number 51. I did the first one here on the Midjourney server a while back, and I've turned it into a near daily habit. So this is going to be our subject for today. I'm just going to get it set up. Ideally, I want a high resolution. So I like about 300 dpi at 7 inches tall for a study like this. That puts us at a width of 3.94 inches. So we're going to make a blank canvas at the same size. 300 dpi, inches, 7 inches, 3.94. Boom. All right. Now we can arrange these together to make our 2 up vertical layout so I can make a new piece here that's going to be a copy of the one on the left. Fantastic. So let me give you a little demo. Let me give you a little introduction to what I've been doing here recently. I've been up to a lot. I'm making a lot of art. This is my demo from earlier today, just doing a quick doodle, a little concept doodle. This is kind of like what I would do if I was making a piece of concept art. Maybe a little cleaner than I typically do with concept art when I'm trying to rush through and do a lot of ideas. This was less about making something that was conceptual and something that's maybe a little bit more aesthetic. Just a little loose idea of I started off with this line drawing from Krita, which is a free art program, and it has this weird brush called the chrome brush, whereas one stroke kind of comes near the other, it makes these like spider webs that kind of reach out and connect them. You can see like this, you can see this sort of spider web form as it like makes these strokes that kind of connect as they get close to each other, which creates an interesting look overall. And so I did a really loose drawing in Krita here. Struggling with the controls a little different from Photoshop. And then I copied it and brought it over into Photoshop as my base. And then, you know, from here it feels to me obvious. But if you are starting with a line drawing and you want to do some painting, the next thing you're going to want to do always is put a little bit of like solid color behind it. I'm starting this off in black and white the way I normally do. And so I'm just building in a little bit of loose value to sort of add some dimension to our guy, as well as adding, you know, swapping up the elements a little bit, adding this like scarf thing, and, you know, giving him some sort of like a base background color. And then over the top of that, I'm adding the background that goes behind him, as well as starting to like repose the arms and find like a few details that I want to flesh out. I'm just keeping everything very broad, very loose. And like, then I think I spent the next like hour or so just making a ton of tiny little brush strokes with my round brush. You can see it's got this nice, smooth, slick look to it. And this is that layer in isolation. It's like just like laying a new piece of like cellophane over the top and then working just on that one layer by itself. As it gets layered over the bit underneath, they come together and you can see the sort of mixture of the rougher bits still showing through, all the darker parts of the background, and then the new smooth brush strokes coming out over the top. Then right at the end, I added some color adjustment layers. I like these gradient maps, adding in some color. And then I've got this glaze layer that is, the blending mode is set to hard light. It's my favorite for doing glazes. And just bringing in some of the greens, some of the reds, complementary colors to contrast off each other. And that allows me to separate out some bits. So some of the bits are going orange and some of the bits are going bluish. And by separating them out by color a little bit, I end up with a little bit more differentiation on like, you know, different materials. So like the orange bits coming out of the neck, coming out of this collar area, gives a different impression than when everything's all white. And that's it, just a little bit of adjustment. And then I've got myself a nice, rough digital concept. And it wasn't really built on like a particular idea. It was more of me just sort of following my nose and having a vision for, you know, a certain aesthetic that I wanted. And, you know, whatever random marks were in there, if I felt like there was something that connected or something, you know, would feel a little bit more right going one way or the other, I was just kind of pushing and pulling things in a way that felt more right every single time. And it wasn't really like a conscious decision. It was more of just intuitively going through the whole canvas and pushing things around if they felt like they were out of place, focusing more on areas of high detail. And then we end up with this image where we end up with a lot of tight detail towards like the focal point. And then as we get out into these more ancillary areas, it gets darker and less focused and more rough. And it's nice little gimmick. Nice little one-off. The thing that I'm spending more time on is this painting is part of my tarot series. This is the Strength card through the Strength Tarot. And it started its life off as a pencil sketch. So with these kinds of images, I usually start off with a pencil sketch. And this is a rough approximation of it. I've chopped it up and made a couple of minor edits. You can see that like the wing used to be in a little tighter on the body. And that this arm used to come out a little further. You can see the silhouette of where the hand used to be. That arm was kind of chopped off and like brought in a little closer into the body that way. Same thing with, you could see that the head was also kind of like separated and like brought forwards a little bit on the shoulders. So I make a few little edits on here, pencil drawing wise, and it acts as kind of a lattice foundation that everything builds from. And then I do a very similar thing as what I was showing before, where I'm laying a ground underneath. Just a little bit of flat color at first, and then I start to build it out and give it a little bit of extra dimension, add a little bit of extra rendering, just to get a sense on like, where's the lighting going to be? You know, how are these figures going to be arranged? What is the pattern of light and dark across the whole thing? And, you know, the goal is to try to keep it really loose, keep it really rough. I had this idea of like the sort of sliver of light coming in over the shoulder and splashing across both the face of the man and the goat here, angel and the goat. And I was focusing most of my additions and edits on things that I felt like were out of place. Like I had the perspective wrong on the arm, getting that corrected, trying to make sure that everything that's going to be like important in this painting is going to see some level of detail. And trying to balance out the composition so that the whole thing feels like really complete and natural. And I thought I had something going here, so I went into color. And, you know, it's all right, but I don't feel like it's, felt like I wanted it like a darker, richer color. It was pushing too much. The highlights are pushing very much towards white, and it gives it a kind of washed out, flat feeling. So I started to introduce colors that were a little bit warmer, a little bit richer. But I was running into some problems where I felt like the more I built this out, the more this main focus area with the face where the goat and the angel's face are kind of meeting, everything's getting a little too dark and a little too muddy. I'm looking at my navigator up here, and this is the point where I was starting to despair a little bit. It felt like my painting was not coming together, and I didn't like it. So I tried to clean it up a little bit by just painting on top of it, seeing, hey, maybe if I like paint out some details, I can escape this bad feeling that my painting's not working the way I want it to. And so I fixed that. I corrected a few other areas, like working on the shoulder armor, things like that, hoping, like, hey, you know what? I think this is going to work out. Gave it a little bit of rim light on the front. Took another pass to try to, warm up the light even more. These oranges coming in, it's feeling very like sunset mood. There's something about it that is like working for me, but the more I push in this direction, the more I feel like I'm losing the face and it feels like I'm losing the core thing that's interesting about this painting. So I looked up some reference, and the reference was showing me that it was maybe I had gotten everything backwards. Maybe what I really wanted was I wanted the skin to be a lot lighter, and I wanted the background to be a lot darker. And, whenever I feel like something is not working, my first thing I'm going to reach for is to just do the opposite of whatever I'm currently doing. So right now I've got a darker figure on a lighter background, and everything's warm. So I made this, I put these like really heavy glazes over the top of it to try to change all the colors to cool colors and have like a lighter figure on a darker background. And I was thinking like, this feels like it could be a step forward. This could be like a reinvention of this concept. I think that this might actually all fit together a lot nicer, but it's also kind of ugly. The more I try to push those cool colors in to cover over all these places where the orange was still peeking through, the less I liked the overall impression of it. So instead of pushing like the orange all over everything, I instead started to bring in like the warm light again, but just selectively inside this like focal area here. And from there, I finally started to see like this version of the painting where this little pool of light, this little pool of warmth is happening right here between the two faces. And that other stuff is kind of cooling off. And we have this darker sky with this like sliver of light that's coming up over the horizon. We can see the light going across the horizon under the clouds there. And then we can still see it casting across the faces. And so I started from there, and I added some more opaque paint up on top of it to clean up, some of the ways that these clouds are expressing, and to like start to push the light more across the front of the face. So bringing out the side planes of the nose and like creeping that light forward to define the eye, and like combining that with the rim light, I felt like finally the face was really reading at a distance. And I had this interesting mix of colors, these like purple colors in the face and these blues and these oranges, and like the flowers in the hair bringing more attention up to the face again. That all of the problem solving it kind of accumulated here, where I felt like I was getting what I wanted compositionally out of it again. So now I've got this rough version of the painting where I've got these little color moments down here where the green of the grass is starting to show through against this orange light, and the glowing little flowers that are just catching the last bits of light of the sun coming over the hill. I'm getting decently happy with like the way that the cloth is getting rendered. I feel like the metal is feeling very metallic. Every bit of it feels like it's starting to be the better version of itself. And now that I've got a roughly defined kind of like loose version of the thing, all I need to do then is to start to spread these colors around, figure out where all the edges are, figure out where the surface details are, and like, maybe spend another 10 hours poking around at all the little individual details, zone by zone, picking out first like the background and like simple supporting areas, and winding my way towards the center and making sure that things like the face and the hand and like all the high contrast bits of fur, they all look really, really good kind of last. By working back to front like that, I found I always end up being able to build like a stronger painting, because if I focus on all the parts that need to be done that are like the most important first, I don't really have a context for how rendered they need to be. But if I start with like all of the difficult background supporting elements first, then the what I need to do with the big important focus like always comes into form. Like it always becomes a lot more clear, and I need to like go back and forth quite a bit less. So I try to do things in that order every single time. And originally it was like a big effort, but I found that over the years, all the things that I used to need to like spend conscious effort to do inside of painting slowly become automatic. So now, like, whenever I get to this point, I can tell that I'm just about ready to move forwards, because I can feel my hand reaching for doing all the little side bits, like trying to get the background clouds really clean and like all the little bits of grass nice and clean and finished. When I'm there, then I know that my brain is ready to start to move on to the next step. So I've got that. That is something I'm going to be working on maybe tomorrow on stream on Twitch, and then also maybe I'll maybe just by myself this evening. We'll see what happens. But for right now, I am going to set myself up with this study, and I'm going to build something new from scratch for you guys. So the brushes I'm using are not very complicated. I've got a textured sponge brush here. That's a default Photoshop tool. just throw this in to create like a little bit of rough textured ground. That's because it hurts my eyes to be staring straight into a big block of white. And it gives me a little bit of extra perspective in terms of the contrast. The difference between bright white against like 80% gray, versus 100% black. It's like harder to tell. It's a lot easier to figure out where everything is value-wise when I am a little bit closer to 50% gray, a little bit closer to the middle. So one of the strategies for doing a study like this is to do a really accurate drawing first. And in some cases, I do start with a bit of drawing. But for these closer up portraits, excuse me, I actually find I have a little bit of an easier time just blocking in really big blocks of value, just roughly, just making like a big, huge, inaccurate mess. Like it doesn't matter because like we are going to go through hundreds of little brushstrokes, maybe even thousands of little brushstrokes that are going to tweak and adjust this. And the silhouette of it is really not the most important part. That's something that we're going to be cleaning up at a later step. The main thing is we're going to try to be finding our way through all of the broad details and structure of this thing, of this head. And from there, we're going to be able to, we're going to work out the large shapes of the face, figure out where those correspond to these smaller landmarks, like the dark shapes inside the eye and the corners of the mouth, inside the nostrils, place things like the ear, and then we're going to check it against our reference and see how we do. Hopefully by the end of this, we'll not only be able to create a somewhat accurate portrait here, but we'll actually be able to stylize it a little bit, put our own little individual spin on this thing. So this jawline, how high are we going here? I can say for certain, he's got these one of the reasons I pulled out this reference image is because he has these really defined features. This model has very, very defined features. And so we can see like these borders of like the side plane of the head. There's like a corner. He's like this guy looks like he's low poly. And so we can actually, we've got catching the light along the side here. So maybe we'll make it light. It is the center line on the face. You can see that there's more light coming along this on his left side and more shadow on the right. You can kind of split that down the middle and presume that if we imagine this as being like even more low poly, we can see like the separation here. And then we want to chop it up a little bit more. We're going to start making some more subdivisions. You can see that across the top of the, there's the mouth. We're not going to cut all of the opening for the lips and everything in there first. We're going to go over the top of it like this and have a shadow on the bottom and a lit area on the top. We're looking at the entire shape of the mouth around here. We're looking at these larger shapes behind the facial features, the way that like the three-dimensional structure of the mouth goes all the way around the figure. And this gives us a little bit of a chin here too. can see the way that the cheekbones darken under here, both sides, because we have a light that's coming right down on top of them. Can see the cheek here comes down from the tear duct, and then we've got separated by the side plane of the nose. If we imagine that the nose, we take away all the details of the nose here, we can imagine this kind of Voldemort-like face. It's like this. This is not the way I was doing demos for these kinds of studies back when I first started doing it a couple of months ago. But I've been doing quite a bit of these studies, and I've also been doing some research on classical painting techniques. And this is something that I'm currently experimenting with, because this is new territory for me, and it's been a lot of fun to do things like this, because it's answered my questions about, like, how do we find where the features are in the face all relative to each other? We have all of these like dynamically curving lines. We have these curving eyebrows that are curving not just across the face in one arc, but in 3 dimensions around the side of the face. Like, if you think about it, all of these features are curving in 3 dimensions. The eye is coming up and over towards this direction, but it's also like, traveling in this direction up. And then it's like curving, across over this way as well. And to try to like figure out where all of that is in 3D space as a single wiggly line is pretty hard. And every time we're going to guess on the first try, we're probably going to get it wrong too. So one of the things I was really struggling with when I was doing these studies was to figure out how do I find where this is all supposed to fit together? Because it's not even just a matter of like, nailing these like individual little markers and tracking where all these features are. Because I was trying to like look for where these little edges were and sort of map out these like key markers, almost like I'm, tracking someone's face with facial tracking software, and to create this grid and then map that grid over there, and then try to draw the dynamic lines that make up each of these features on top of this. And I kept finding that was really hard to do, and I was having to spot check back and forth. And worse than that, I wasn't actually understanding where the 3-dimensional structures were for these figures. So now I'm trying this out, and I immediately have been enjoying it more, where I'm looking at this entirely as a 3-dimensional structure first, and then trying to place these more 2-dimensional structures on top of it. I'm not going to worry too much about getting the values really perfect off the bat. I really just want to find, you can see over the top of the brow here, we've got around the orbital socket, you have these ridges here, where everybody's got these. And it kind of, from the side view, what you see is it starts in, the brow comes in like this, and then it pops back out again, like that. And it can be kind of subtle, like you don't always see it unless it's lit just right. So I'm going to make sure that we exaggerate that a little bit so we can see where these shapes are as we're like building the 3-dimensional structure of this head. Like this. Bridge of the nose is coming up here. Once we start to get this structure put together, I then am going to like try to double check to see and make sure that all of the shapes that we're placing down are mostly correct for what we see in our example here. Because that is going to give us, this is where we're going to start building all the other things on top of. Inside the recess of the eye socket here, the eye is sticking back out a little bit. You can see the actual underside of the oh my god, my brain is dying. The eyelid like gives us this light dark. But if we think about this as a larger shape, you can see just the highlight of the eyelid is showing us what it would look like if it were one continuous shape here. Same thing on the other side. This guy's starting to look a little bit like a weird robot mask, or those masks that they wear in Squid Game during the finale. All the weird rich people wear those geometric masks of all the planes of the face all mapped out. The first time I tried to do this, it was a disaster, and I wanted to run back to my old techniques. But the more I think about it, the more I think, like, of course I was bad at it the first time I tried doing it. Like, I've got a lot of muscle memory for doing things my old way. But this is I think this is a better work method for what I'm trying to accomplish here. And so it's worth it for me to give it a few repetitions and see if like it really ends up producing a better result than what I had before. The nose looks really complicated because it's got all of these curling forms going in different directions. If you break it down geometrically, what we can see is that the bulb of the nose is kind of sticking up here, and then we have a kind of reverse on the other side below the tip that is making this like other triangle on the other side. Like, we're going to ignore the fact that there's the cutout of the nostril and try to see what it looks like to just look at the planes of the object around it, the larger outside shape. And so this darker form just represents the underplane of the nose here. And we can see that it's being interrupted by this little bifurcated little shape that comes down the front of above the upper lip here. People always notice this little divot, but it comes forward quite a bit more than I think we realize. So it's creating a little bit of overlap because we can see that the rear nostril is actually underlapping behind it. And then this whole shape is curling around the face this way. See, like, we have this long curling. There's like a orange slice. And then the reverse underneath, creating the dark part underneath the lip. The lip ends up curling up quite a bit. So we can cut in. I think we're about ready to be able to cut in that dark underside of the upper lip. And we're seeing the upper curl of the lower lip there. And then it winds back on itself really aggressively, creating this dark shadow. The more of these little subdivisions we make, the closer we get it to looking more or less right. But we're not going to keep doing that infinitely. What I want instead is to create a simple base that I can then judge against the reference, and then start to make more surface level observations about the pattern of light and dark on here. Start to get these some of these edges picked out. Try to get like the overall value structure like built up right. The steps that I was normally starting with, I want to do those now that I have something that feels like a real structure to be able to pin it down against. So let's see. Where am I screwing it up? Let's make a new layer so that I can compare the work past this point from where we've done so far. Draw in the eyebrows a little bit as a bit of a marker too. Because I don't think that I've nailed the structure of it perfectly. No. It feels like we've got this chin has kind of come out far this way. That's one of the big ones. He's got this light coming around the back of his neck. Interesting. Focusing on this kind of stuff has really helped me. Like when I go and make stuff from imagination, like that face I was showing in that painting with the angel and the goat, I was able to draw that without any reference at all because I've been spending so much time looking at faces and doing these kinds of studies. I just have that stuff in my subconscious at this point. So it's really easy for me to like draw out those kinds of shapes again in a different context since I've spent all this time, using my curiosity to kind of explore through all these little curves and shapes and identify what's similar about different people's faces and what's different, what makes people look a certain way. If you spend time studying that, you can end up with a huge library of of information that you can draw from to be able to make things from imagination. In order to build that library, you need to go back and forth between this kind of painting where you're studying from a reference and you're looking at what really exists versus like imaginative work where you're trying to draw from just thin air. See, this ear is definitely lower than I had pegged it for. It's really helping because he's got this thing where it's like the whole head is kind of, really lilting back in this dramatic way. So I don't want to have too much of it kind of piling up back here. I need to bring it forward a little bit. So while I make these corrections and analyze my model and start to add more detail, I'm available for answering questions. So if anybody has any kind of questions, you can feel free to hit the hand raising button and Ancient Chaos will bring you on stage. You can ask me questions about my process. You can ask questions about anything I've been working on, anything that's happening in the news, questions you have about your own creative development. If you've been working on any art and you have any questions about working with Photoshop or Krita and want to like bounce something off professional, I'm here for you. Victoria, hello.
Hi, nice VTuber.
Thank you.
I will miss the hand cam process thing and stuff, but this is a nice little change.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll bring the hand cam back at some point.
Bring the hand cam back. Woo. But so a little bit of a question right here. I'm currently doing something off to the side and I'm having trouble with a certain texture. I believe. How would you go about doing like folds in cloth and stuff? I've seen some of your work which features like a lot of cloth and wavy textures, but how do you go about that is simple enough to work off of, but isn't like going to take 500 years to?
You're worried if you're going to deal with 500 years of pain if you commit to drawing folding.
Yeah, it's like I sometimes stress over the little like folds and details and stuff. I don't have the experiences you do, so I don't have the right idea of how to tell which is like an important fold and which one probably you could just add that in post.
Yeah, it's you know, dynamic drapery is one of those things that like everybody wants to learn if they're going to commit to painting, especially figurative painting. Like it comes up all the time, regardless of like what your specialty is. Even if you're like, doesn't matter if you're doing sci-fi or fantasy or anime or whatever, it feels like dynamic cloth is always going to come up. And so it's important to be able to have a grip on it. But it's hard. It's really hard. So I'm in the middle of doing that on my painting, on my strength tarot painting here. Um, so what I found is that it is nearly impossible to draw realistic clean cloth out of your head. It can be done, but the main thing that I do whenever I am in a situation like this is I try to pull up a lot of different reference. And it's let's say I'm looking on Pinterest here for flowing skirt, right? So we can get a lot of dynamic cloth here. This is really great. The way that this is sort of cloth is like it's in motion, it's flying around. We're getting to see the different types of folds happening simultaneously. And you can see there's a real different. Let me pull this into Photoshop real quick. There's a real difference between areas like this, where you have these like tight overlapping folds. And you're like, well, I definitely need those, right? And it's a lot of very straight lines or these like long curving lines. Like, okay, I get that. But then there's like all this other stuff. And it depends entirely on what kind of cloth it is. This is a really thick cloth. And so we end up with these like large flat shadows here where it's not overlapping. It's not crinkling on top of itself, but it's actually, it's what it is it's like, it's crumpling a little bit, but it's like so rigid that it doesn't fold entirely back in on itself. Like a really soft cloth is going to end up with all kinds of like little tiny folds in it, right? And there's going to be tons of like little tiny, like lots of these little tiny marks as they like all like create all these little overlaps. But with a more thicker structured cloth, we end up with these really long stretches where nothing's quite folding over itself. So like it, depending on what kind of cloth you're trying to depict, the answer for like, how do you paint it is going to be different. So the solution I have is that I typically try to find about 6 to 10 photos that represent the type of cloth and the type of motion that it's under. And I especially want to see if I can find one image that is more or less exactly the kind of cloth pose that I'm looking for. so that I can copy very specific folds, like the way that this kind of cups in here to make that teardrop shape. That's the sort of thing where I would say, well, that seems to be unique to the kind of cloth that I'm looking for and the kind of motion that it's having. I'd look for other unique factors, like this thing makes this weird rectangle here where it kind of bends at a 90-degree angle, then it comes back and bends at another 90-degree angle. It's very weird and unexpected. It's the sort of thing you're only going to find in a reference and maybe not pull out of your head. So I'm looking for moments like that, or like the way that this kind of spirals around. Both there's a fold that kind of comes up underneath, and then one that goes over the top, and they kind of yin yang around each other. Those sorts of little moments, I'm going to try to find areas to insert something like that into my painting in like a rough way. And then the reason why I want to have like 6 to 10 reference images is because a surprising amount of the process of painting something that we know what the texture of it is like, but it's not specifically supposed to be any one thing. Like with cloth, you know that this is like cloth, but it's not because you've seen something that's exactly this shape before. You know that there's a texture to cloth that is broadly understood. And that's not something that can be fully digested as like one idea or even picking apart like a handful of little rules. There's this kind of holistic feeling to the texture of it. The same thing is true of like clouds. Anything that's got a very organic shape, or waves. There's not a specific arrangement of light and dark that makes something look like a wave or like a cloth or like a cloud, but a general texture. AI tends to be pretty good at replicating these sorts of things because there are kind of rules for it, but it also tends to struggle a little bit because it also tends to break the rules of logic, because it's not actually concerned with a real physical object. So what I found is that our brains are really good at subconsciously taking in these kinds of materials. So if you can spend a bunch of time looking at a lot of these images, saving them into a folder, and then keeping them nearby as you work, you'll find that in sessions where you are priming your brain by looking at a lot of this stuff first, your hand will naturally find its way through it, which is crazy. Like, without feeling like you know anything more, there's parts about the process of learning it that are going to come down to you, like looking at the specifics and picking it apart and trying and failing and like going through trial and error to try to see if you can replicate the exact texture of like weird right angle turns that makes it feel like flying crumpled cloth. But there's a big part of it, a really big part that is going to happen non-verbally and non-consciously as it sort of like just worms its way into your brain. And that's the part that you can not only like kind of summon by, ingesting a lot of images that are right for that, like looking through a lot of images right before you start to draw or paint that thing, but also that stuff will stick with you to some degree long term. So the more times that you attempt to do this, the more easily you'll be able to draw it like just intuitively without having to look up any reference or think about any rules. There's a lot of rules to like the reasons why cloth drapes in a way that it does. And there is a certain amount of academic study you can do to figure out what types of folds they are, what the names of the different folds, how do they behave, what are the physical properties that cause them to do that kind of stuff. But when it comes to drawing out of your imagination, creating something for yourself, a lot of it comes down to like, I found that like the first time I needed to paint something like this, I spent a lot of time looking up a ton of reference, trying and failing. And like in the end, I had something that was my best effort, but it wasn't amazing. But the next time I tried to paint it, it was really easy. And so there is, instead of doing that on your painting, it might be worth it for you to try to do some studies where pick out some cloth that represents the kinds of folds, the kinds of texture. Like you can see that like different like thicknesses of cloth behave incredibly differently from each other. And this is, the effect can even be replicated in solid marble So this isn't even a matter of like the material itself. This is something that can, the impression of which can be replicated in any medium. So I suggest you find some examples of that, curate it, do a study or two really quickly, maybe not more than an hour each, then go back into your painting and give it another shot, prepped with that knowledge. And I think you're going to have a very, very different experience than what you got just, looking at a couple of references and wondering what the hell you're supposed to do. Because it's a really complicated problem. Because there's not a specific pattern of lines and shadows that are going to be perfect for what you're looking for. There's about 1,000 correct answers for creating dynamic cloth in an imaginative drawing. And any one of them would be right. And so you just need to find your way into one of them. You just need to find one of the many correct solutions. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps quite a lot. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any follow-up questions? Are you wondering about anything else from what I was just talking about?
Well, I don't think I can hear it if it ever is in the background, but what kind of music do you listen to when you're doing live painting?
When I'm doing paintings like this, I don't listen to anything. It's one of the reasons I always love when people come on stage to chit chat, because otherwise it's me talking to myself in dead silence. When Spotify does this thing, the weekly recommended, and every week I give a listen through like what Spotify is trying to throw my way, and I just keep getting a lot of really funky stuff recently. So some indie rock mixed with some sort of funkier things. I haven't heard of the vast majority of the bands that come through on my Spotify recommended, but I try to pull out the songs that really speak to me. Let's see, what's in my liked songs. The interface keeps moving right as I try to click it. Here you go. Honeymoon, Digitalism, BDRMM. James Supercave, I think, is excellent. His voice reminds me of Tom York. Simon Spine, Acid Dad. Cut Copy, a band I found years and years ago, and then I've lost and forgot about, and then found again. Yeah, I don't know. Like, this isn't like the bands that I usually follow, but like, yeah, Spotify has been good at finding stuff that has all the right weird vibes that I've been able to like take and King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard. I like them quite a bit. There's a band called Fucking Whatever, which I thought that was a great name for a band, and it turns out they've got some really good songs. So, and then I also, while I'm painting for long sessions, like if I'm working on like 10 hours of rendering on something, I usually find like movies or TV to put on also. So like if I'm just doing rendering, I don't need to use all of my brain to be able to work through all of these questions. And so I'm able to watch like TV shows while I'm doing this. So I'll either go rewatch something that I really enjoyed back in the past, or I'll try to find some new drama, something that's really talky that doesn't have subtitles, so I don't need to pull my eyes off the monitor.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that, where it's like, if you put on a certain type of music, does it put you in a certain type of mood? Like if you're painting angels, do you listen to like something relaxing, chill, or maybe even like esoteric and stuff to put you in like that headspace,
No, I mean, I don't really associate like the headspace of the music with what I'm painting most of the time. It's like a bigger deal when I'm writing. Like if I have to write, I can't listen to any kind of speech while I'm writing. So I'm trying to find music that makes me feel like I want to stick to my chair and stay motivated to work while not like activating the verbal part of my brain so that I can actually continue to write. And that's always the challenge. So I need to find like non-verbal music to put on. Spotify has been helpful with that. But yeah, something energetic almost always, because I want to feel like excited and engaged with the work and not feeling like I'm bored and sleepy and want to get up and go have a snack.
Yeah, I've been listening to some post-rock albums I found on YouTube recently, and it's definitely getting a lot of creative juices like flowing.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like what I would do too.
Okay, I'm going to cede the stage to someone else, maybe in the crowd. Thank you very much for the advice, and have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for coming up. If anybody has any other questions about art process or anything in the news or something they want to discuss about their work, you're welcome to come up here and say hi. I'll make a new layer here for the background color. Hamed, hello. And he's gone. So he just wanted to dare himself to see if he could make it. We've got a couple other people who are on their way up. Braver souls than Hamed.
I'm inviting them up. It's just a matter of if they join or Discord cooperates.
So I like to add a little bit of the color background here, in part because it's so separate from the color creates extra separation from the black and white, which gives me a little bit more perspective on the difference in this silhouette. Like I can see how much longer the head is on mine from the reference here, coming in a little high. Since it's kind of the whole thing, I'm going to grab a chunk of this guy here, and I'm going to copy it into a new layer, and I'm going to just smush him down. I think that's what I needed. Zaz, hello.
Hi. Um, I have a side question that might be the most interesting one. Have you already talked about how to implement vary region into the process of like refining a subject before or painting or any other step you may want to take?
Oh, can you ask that one more time? What kind of region?
Midjourney just released essentially in painting. It's called the Vary region.
Very. No, I haven't tried it.
Oh, right.
I have to give it a shot. Like, I've been really busy doing I've been building a little bit of my online art school, Huckleberry Art Academy, and like that's involved me spending a lot of time streaming. So I'm spending many hours a day streaming and doing demos. And I have been concentrating on little else over the last few weeks.
All right. I do have a backup question. So I like drawing and doing artistic things nowadays is not my main focus, but I do find that I have the same kind of issue that I had when I was more of a graphics artist, and I had more of that into my daily routine. My hands quickly start to become sore, and it can become painful. Yeah, people easily can develop carpal tunnel, all sorts of even medically problematic things, but like going just baseline, do you have any just very maybe unintuitive or interesting tips about making sure your tendons, your muscles, your joints don't get mistreated by, essentially having the same position for a long time, just in general, anything in that
Yeah,
department?
I've definitely had experience with it. It's when I was first trying to become a freelance artist, I almost immediately put myself into a hand brace because I was trying to work for crazy long hours, which was, I think, the main core problem. But then also I was working in a method that forced me to put a lot of pressure on my hand. So there's a couple of things in particular. So Wacom tablet properties, you get to do a little bit. I always try to make sure that I don't soften the pen pressure too much. Like the amount of pressure you need to get to the maximum on tablet is like actually really high. If you're pushing hard enough to get to the maximum, you're putting a ton of strain on your hand. So you can make that even higher. I tend to soften it a little bit to make it so that it requires less pressure in order to get up to that top level. So I take it one notch down like that. And then the other thing that I do is my default brush in Photoshop is one where the pressure adjusts the size of the brush. This is not entirely standard. The brush panel not going to pop up? Nope, it's not like button pushes. All right, whatever. It's in. Where are my brushes? No, that's not it. It's brush parameters. Why are my brushes not popping up? Photoshop is misbehaving.
What else is new?
Oh yeah, the whole panel is just like, there it goes. I was taking forever to load. I got a bunch of new brushes in here. Okay. So you can see that the default round brush is like the one that I use where it tapers at the tips here. But the one that is actually really popular to use in digital art is one like this, where you can see it fades at the tips. I don't understand how people use this. Drives me crazy, but it is extremely popular in digital media. And what it does is like, as you push harder, you end up with
more opacity, essentially.
Yeah, more opacity. So this makes it so that if you want to have like you pick out exactly the right color and you want to put it somewhere, you end up having to like not only size your brush exactly right, but you also have to like push really hard to like push it in and really scrape it in. And that to me is just a recipe for hand strain. I know a lot of people that use brushes like that and it hurts them quite a bit. I have a friend who was having really chronic issues with his wrist, his hand, and his elbow, and had had surgery and he'd do quite a bit of like work doing yoga and things to be able to take away some of the hand pain he was having. He was doing a lot of exercise to help with it. And so I showed him that I use a brush and that is mimicking more like a traditional paintbrush in the way that like a soft pressure will just touch the surface with just the tip of the brush, while pushing in will smush the body of the brush down. And he was a traditional painter. And so he's like, oh my God, I never thought of that. And it allows you to sort of oversize the brush. And so you can make like really large, fully opaque strokes with a very, very light touch. So way, way less pressure on the hand with each stroke. So combined with like, regular breaks, and my job also usually isn't about just painting all the time, but a mixture of painting, emails, meetings, all sorts of other stuff besides just the art, just clicking a mouse or using a tablet, I'm able to like get a decent amount of time on and off, like the tools that are going to cause hand strain. And so even though I feel like I've got a fairly limited capacity for painting on any given day, Tuesdays are my long ones because I stream, here, and I stream on Twitch also. So I put in about 5 hours of painting is like max for me. So even with a maximum that's not a full day painting, I've managed to build a whole art career, and I haven't had any surgeries, and I haven't had any chronic issues with my hand. I attribute a lot of it to like using a table mounted, like a pen tablet that's on a table instead of one that's like got a screen on it. So I'm able to like get in a more comfortable hand position, and then my brush settings that allow me to use very, very light pressure and still have a lot of control. Like those two things combined means that like I've just made the task of using a tablet every single day much easier on my hand overall, because it should be a primary concern for anybody that does this full time, because you will have to have surgery on your hand after just a few years of trying to like work really hard, but either pushing 12-hour days or like pushing really hard or working in a position that like puts strain on your body. I've known people that have had multiple surgeries before they hit 30.
Wow.
It's really not acceptable.
No. All right. In that context, because you're talking about using a brush, and personally, I never really had any training, and I'm talking about even just using a mouse, using a pen. Like I feel like in general, people do not have any idea of the physical movements and positions, and I am very guilty of that. And for example, if I were to want to train myself so I don't, I recognize when I'm straining, I recognize when I'm having the wrong kind of finger position, or like, I don't even know what I would be looking out for, which is part of the issue. Like, do you know of any resource of any kind that can actually help do exercises for that? I'm not talking about, relieving pain when already you have a problem, just preventing it.
There's definitely plenty of YouTube videos about this topic of like stretches and exercises that you can do to help reduce the risk of carpal tunnel for people who work with a mouse or a tablet full time. I don't usually do any of those. I usually focus on the things that I just talked about. I can say also from experience and from knowing a lot of people who are in this field that like if you experience any pain while working, that it should be treated with a lot of seriousness. That like people will sometimes treat the pain that they get from their hand while they're working kind of like muscle pain from an exercise, where you go, oh, it's uncomfortable now, but it'll be fine. I won't die from this. This pain's not going to kill me. It may even be the feeling of me working really hard and getting stronger. But with the case of like hand strain, repetitive stress injury, it's not at all like working out a muscle in the gym. It's not making the muscles in your hand stronger. It is like inflammation that is causing damage. And so if you start to experience this kind of discomfort, it's really important to stop working as soon as you can and to take a break and to maybe try out some of these exercises, because it's not something that you can just ignore and put on the back shelf in your mind and hope that like it's going to work out. Because if you're experiencing that pain, then you are experiencing some amount of potentially long-term harm in that moment. And it's going to progressively build up and get worse if you don't address it immediately. If you can't change the way that you're working or take the appropriate breaks, then you are going to be experiencing more and more of that pain until it becomes debilitating. So it should always be treated with like a lot of seriousness as soon as it starts happening. And need to change something about your workstation or like the way that you're working as soon as you start to experience that.
Okay, so I should be looking up resources for this and try different methods and aim so that the pain just is not there. Like that is the goal.
Yeah,
There should
no,
be
you should not be experiencing any pain. Any amount of pain that you're experiencing from like mouse and tablet use is too much, because it's not something that is going to just happen. It's something that is going to progressively accumulate.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, when you're thinking about thinking about like the idea of exercise, pain from like exercise in the gym. Like there's a difference between the pain of like doing a really difficult bench press and like the pain of twisting your elbow. And I think intuitively we understand like, hey, I pulled a muscle versus like that was heavy and it took a lot of effort to lift. But like when it comes to like repetitive stress injuries, it's just fundamentally different, and it needs to be treated in a different way than the kind of like muscle like discomfort that you get from like difficult exercise. So, I see. My friend who has had issues with this is sitting there in the chat. So if you want to bring Theonidas up, he's probably got insight on this because he's dealt with more shit than I have. Done it first.
Right. I get a step back for the moment. Leave the stage.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on. Are you sick today, Peter?
No, I've been streaming for 5 hours.
No, I am a little sick today, but I came to hang out, and I definitely had a crap ton of pain through my early career just out of college. It basically just is repetitive motion, overuse injury, essentially. And it's probably because, like Peter said, you're putting too much pressure where you definitely don't need to be. But you're also repeating that same motion thousands of times a day, which probably builds up the strength of like a certain part of your arm and then weakens the rest of you. So I did have a crap ton of pain. And the only thing after surgery, after acupuncture, chiropractor, the only things that really helped was standing desk. First of all, that definitely kind of helped get my posture better. Getting rid of a Cintiq, which is one of the big problems there, is you're kind of dangling your neck and your body over this huge screen, which just gives you like a hunchback just to be able to work. So getting rid of that and going back to the old style tablets. And making sure that computer screen is directly in front of your eyes and you're not looking down. So anytime I try to draw on an iPad, I have really bad pain. So the more you can straighten and strengthen the posture of your upper spine and your shoulders and your elbows down to your wrist, I feel like that's when you're going to feel a little bit more relief throughout the day. Essentially getting it to the point where there's no corruption at any of the joints, not in your neck, not in your shoulder, not in your elbow, your wrist. So you want to kind of free up all of that. But even still, some people like me have chronic pain after fixing their ergonomic situation, which is why I still do.
A lot of damage early on, I think. You're the kind of person who will overwork. Like if somebody gives you the opportunity to like blow your shit out, you're gonna take it.
Yeah. And I definitely did that in my senior year of college. I was freelancing for film and also doing my thesis and having a ball. It was the best years of my art career, but it truly did ruin the next few years of my life. And even still, I have a lot of pain. But what I was going to say is I spend 5 hours a week on yoga, which is just 5 classes. And that has been the one thing that keeps me to the point where I can paint as much as I like to paint. I think if I had a overtime career job working 50, 60 hours, I wouldn't be able to do it. I'd be in pain still. And that may be from old injury to my neck or my spine or something. because I've talked to a lot of artists who don't have that same problem at all. So it's a bit of overworking, a lot of ergonomics. Definitely just Google best ergonomics for standing desk, and you'll see how your elbow and your neck and your shoulders should look. And then the last thing is um, some sort of preventative care, such as I don't know if sports are the best idea, but going to the gym um, and or flexibility like yoga, exercise like that. There was a really amazing artist who got asked this question, and he didn't give an answer. He's like, "No, I've never had pain." But then later in the talk, I think he mentioned all these activities he does with his friends. He does rock climbing. He goes and plays volleyball, this and that. I'm like, oh, okay. He's got the repetitive motion problem like any illustrator does, except, after hours, he's going to climb rocks, which will strengthen all the muscles that you need as a painter. And so he didn't necessarily know that he could potentially be in a lot of pain if he didn't have all these fun activities he was doing with his friends. So yeah, if you have a family and you're going to work, and then after work, you're coming home to paint to try and become an artist, and you just don't leave time for your diet, you don't leave time for your physical health, you're gonna run into quite a bit of problems. And so for me, I've been pretty selfish with my schedule. I kind of stop everything. I go to yoga, and that at least keeps me in shape for the next few hours until I wake up the next morning. I get a little uncomfortable. I go to yoga. It kind of fixes it up again. I wish he was still on the chat so we could talk a little bit more, but I just wanted to pop in to say my advice, and also what I gathered from that one artist, was being physically active, not drinking a Starbucks coffee at 8 o'clock at night because you want to stay up all night and paint, getting really good sleep for yourself, which I am super pro at, and just being healthy. I think it's pretty common sense for how to create a healthy organism that you can, become like a great worker. But if you're super unhealthy and you're not sleeping good, and you're also maybe not even paying attention to what you're doing because you're distracted by Netflix, or you're sitting on the couch and you're in a terrible ergonomic pose, these all add up, especially if you're working full-time creative hours.
Yeah, man, I don't know how people work with a Cintiq full time. It drives me crazy. Like, I know all the aspiring artists, it's the first thing they gravitate towards because it's like, it's the most expensive, it's the fanciest looking piece of art equipment that's on the market. So I think it's got to be high quality, but I mean, we need both. We have the means to be able to like get a Cintiq, and art is our profession. So you'd think that that's what we would use, but I prefer I prefer the pen tablet. And then, if for a beginner, it's like so much cheaper. I've been recommending like the XP pen and the Huion pen tablets, and I've been hearing back from people saying that they're excellent for like, I was saying $50, but like one of the guys who just bought it said he got it 20% off. So it's $40 for a Huion off of Amazon, and it like says it's the most these.
I got Huion quite a while ago, and their software was kind of crappy. But everything about the pen, the tilt, the hover, everything was possibly better than Wacom in terms of like what I felt was comfortable.
Wow.
Yeah,
I'm gonna buy them and try them out, and then give them away. I think
for PC it's probably more support, but for Mac I was having a lot of problems with breaking of the sensitivity and stuff like that.
There's your problem right there.
Yeah. But when it came to like working on Cintiq, that was the most like connected I felt with my paintings, because obviously I'm looking at where my finger is going. But I didn't start with a tab or with a Cintiq. I was painting in tablet since like 8th or 9th grade. So that sense of connection with the screen, even though I'm not looking at it, was always kind of second nature. And when I decided to get rid of my Cintiq and go back to a little tablet, it was fairly easy to get back into that routine. But I feel like a lot of people might not enjoy it, especially the younger crowd who's started painting on an iPad Pro with a pencil.
Oh yeah.
I don't think they're going to have
all these kids and their gosh darn iPads.
Yeah.
I don't think they learn how to use pencil and paper.
Yeah. For me, I'm more of a traditional. I love, being up and close and getting into the details as I see my fingers approach the canvas. But for working on computers, it's such a different thing. because a canvas is kind of facing you. You can be standing if you want. You're moving 5-10 feet back to look at it because you can't zoom out. So there's quite a bit of motion in your body as you're traditionally painting.
Mm-hmm.
But if you get into a Cintiq, you're hovering hunchback style over this big screen, and definitely bad feelings for me, at least.
Bad feelings. Yeah. I mean, I get bad feelings whenever I hear from, peers that are fairly young who are talking about the kinds of things you would expect like an elderly person to be dealing with in terms of their physical health. It's like 20-year-olds going in for like, for joint surgery and stuff is nuts. Like shouldn't be happening.
I think it was actually Bobby Chu who came to my school in a wrist brace. And of course, everyone's like, oh no, what's wrong with Bobby? And he had said he's no longer doing the Cintiqs. He's going to go back to a little tablet because he was having a lot of pain. So if Bobby can, surrender to maybe a less intuitive style of art and then come out being a great, comfortable artist, that kind of inspired me to just move away from Cintiqs and try to get my comfort back. I will say that I'm still very uncomfortable. After 5 hours after my desk, I'm just fatigued and I really don't enjoy painting digitally for long hours. So I try to do other things as an artist, like 3D art using a mouse, or maybe sketching traditionally and scanning that in. So really, any way you can break up your long hours with other types of mobility so that you're not constantly just repeating the same 2 inches of brushwork in the center of your tablet, I feel like is probably the way to express yourself long term without having all these extra issues.
Yeah, I think I've never been somebody who's taken particularly good care of themselves physically. So if I'm going to attribute anything to it, I think it's the fact that I got into a situation where I was doing a lot of other stuff. Like I have other obligations besides painting. So I wasn't expected to paint for 8 hours at a time at a computer. And like by doing that and like I sometimes felt like I was never getting enough art done, which was maybe true, but I was also like not suffering the consequences of trying to do too much art. And like, I don't know how much that's actually a lesson for anybody, because it's like, that's really just like a matter of, lifestyle. Like, what are you actually going to be doing with your job? What do you do with your time? Not everyone always has a choice about that. So, but if it's an option, like swapping things up to me feels like the best possible option.
Well, I hope you get a little better, Peter. Based on your profile picture, you're looking a wreck.
Thank you. I'm back in the gym for the first time. If I could, yeah. I haven't been in the last 3 days, but I'll be back in there maybe later today. But I'm working out again because I just again, this the whole health thing. It's like such a big deal to me. I don't want to like succeed at everything in my life and then be like disabled as a matter of like simply poor decision making. If something's going to take me out, God's going to have to take me out, because I'm not going to do it to myself.
Well, another interesting thing that you brought up was just changing your brushes, changing your tablet settings for pressure sensitivity is going to make a huge difference. And you kind of opened my eyes to a few ways where I can block in my painting a lot faster with a heavier flow from the brush versus a very gentle touch, which I usually have my settings to be super gentle, like featherweight, and I have to push very hard. So I think years of that also kind of attributed to the pain.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And also changing expectations of polish is another thing you taught me. For clients that probably didn't expect me to do super hyper polished work, I can tone it back and leave some extra brush marks and leave things a little more sketchy, which kind of brings out the personality of the painter more than me zooming in for an extra, 20 hours on a piece to try and create a photorealism up close. So being able to simplify, getting to a happy point faster without spending all that extra time kind of noodling and rendering things that nobody will ever see. I still feel like I want to render things traditionally because you can approach a painting or step 10 feet back and it should look good. But in most cases, nobody's going to zoom in on Instagram to see the micropixels of your detailed work that you spent all night kind of noodling. And
Yeah. Well, you've had a bunch of paintings blown up to what do you call it? Billboard size. People probably notice some shit at that size, right?
no, because they're 30. No, they're hundreds of feet away. They can't see it. I have experience with both, but even there's a bit of wiggle room with the polish. I think mostly it's just my taste in painting comes from looking at old masters in the books, and you can get a magnifying glass of these little images, and it's so crisp and so like tight, and you think that they're making these little paintings at microscopic detail scale, but really the painting is 10 feet tall, and the brushwork is like goo and drippy and splattery, and you don't realize that when you scale it down to the size of a small book that it looks super realistic or very polished, when in reality there's like a dance of brushwork that's going on in a piece like that. So it's really hard. It was really hard for me as a digital painter to kind of realize this little canvas is not the same as a 10-foot masterpiece on a museum wall.
You know, the other thing I've been hearing a lot of people talk about recently is this idea that a lot of those old masters were using optics, and that like kind of reframes the work that they were doing and how they were accomplishing it.
In what way would you?
Well, I mean, there's like this thing that people have been talking about, you know, Vermeer for a long time, that Vermeer was actually like just using camera obscura to create a lot of that is super intense detail. But it may be possible that a lot more artists, like the Flemish artists, were all using optics to try to cheat that process a little bit, to be able to get all this detail exactly right, not because they were perfect in their eye, but because they were just like using a lens, you know, as the high technology of the time, to create an effect that was physically impossible through any other media.
Well, I heard in the 21st century they started using artificial intelligence to make painting.
Yeah, that only the most despicable artists would use such inhuman technology as a camera obscura to create their work.
Exactly. All right, I'm gonna let you guys get back to it. Good to chat. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, good to talk, man.
All right, buddy. See ya.
See ya.
Hello. Well, hi. That was a really good and I think important discussion, because taking care of your health is really important, and burnout is very real in the creative industry. So I appreciated y'all talking about that. My discussion topic, I guess, was a little bit more on the philosophical end of things, because I think you get this question a lot, right? Like, what is your process? And it's a very hard question to answer, because it's not, it's that one
thing.
Yeah, that one word encompasses a whole spectrum of like processes. It's not. I think there is this kind of popular conception that in art, that in literature, especially from like non-artists, this idea that what we're doing is taking an image from our head and making that image, into a product, into like a finished creative product. When the reality is far more complicated than that. I know, at least from my own experience, sometimes the impetus to start on a piece can be, and I do mainly like writing, and I do like some video editing too. I just finished an AMV, actually, and where I started with that was like, oh, this this music goes very well with this series. This song fits with kind of the themes of this series in a way that I don't necessarily know how to like articulate at this early on. You know, when you're
Right.
first starting out, I think there's this like, and I don't know if you kind of have the same, but there's this like indeterminacy at the beginning. Like you have a very rough idea of like something that you want to do or something that you want to capture. This like, it could
The
be a
vibe.
feeling. Yeah, a vibe, exactly. You start
Talk
with,
about vibes a lot, and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad it entered the vernacular because it feels like an essential thing to talk about when it comes to creativity. Is like a lot of it is just like a vibe or a mood.
yeah, yeah. And, you know, there's this, I think a lot about like, what is it, you know, what does it really mean to quote unquote, like have an image in your head? Because on a very like material level, of course, there's not an image in your head, you know, there's, well, it depends what you mean by image, I guess, right?
Right.
Because an image on the screen is an array of pixels. You know, an image in a painting is a series of brush strokes, which, you know, you could also look at it as like oil on a canvas. It depends how you kind of frame it, but like, what is that, you know, what is that image in your head? I don't think it has a clear form. I think some people are better at quote unquote like visualizing things in their head. But I
Yeah.
think the fuzziness is kind of inherent to the process itself. And like the whole idea of like the creative process in the first place, at least for me, is starting to resolve that indeterminacy.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you don't get an opportunity to have like direct contact with that thing because there is no thing. In fact, I think that like typically when you have an idea in your head, you think you have this vision. If you were to be able to capture it perfectly with the aid of like a computer that could read your mind, I don't think that it would look the way that you hoped it looked. Like the way that it feels to you in the moment is like describing a dream to somebody else. Like it does you can capture the events, but you can't capture the emotional resonance of it.
Yeah.
When you're trying to think about an image in your imagination, in a lot of cases, it's just like I don't think in a lot of cases like the perspective would be right, or like it's more like an AI image than anything else because like there's a certain unreality to it. But we don't experience that unreality because we don't ever actually get to see it externalized. So we have this vision of like that is like kind of there, but not really, really there. And then, you know, we're kind of expecting that should be a way to externalize it, but that presumes that it's like a real coherent image. And I've grown to distrust the idea that it is a coherent image at all. And that like probably that mental image that we have in our head is like pretty incoherent largely, and therefore like maybe not the sort of thing that you would even want to transcribe even if you had the capacity to do it.
Yeah, I'm think exactly the same way. Like it's not, you know, it's not something that has, you can't, when I picture like a room in my head, like I don't have every single detail of the room like worked out because, you know, like, right, like what does it even mean to have every detail worked out? Because it depends on the scale that you're looking at, you know. I can't, if I'm picturing like a living room in my mind, you know, I quote unquote see a couch, a rug, you know, maybe like a hardwood floor. But I don't know what that hardwood floor looks like necessarily. I know it's there. I don't know what the couch looks like. Is it red? Is it blue? Is it green? I could pick a color if I wanted to. And then you start to kind of fasten down a little bit more of an image. But like, what does it feel?
But probably at the expense of the moment of the fidelity of the other elements. Like the more you try to capture the one specific bit of a moment, the more you lose the larger picture.
And to me, it just speaks to this kind of this unbridgeable gap, right, between kind of the world of our experiences and whatever you want to call, kind of the external world, kind of the material, the physical world. Because we think, the closest thing, I think a part of like, to me at least, part of the definition of art lies in the fact that it is so undefinable. But if I were to like fasten down some definition, I would say it's sort of an attempt to like relay our own subjectivity into a material thing, or a physical thing, I guess you could say too.
To try to sort of crystallize or create a fixed form for our own subjective experience.
Exactly. But the thing, of course, is like you could never truly do that, because there is some fundamental quality that like separates, we know that we have experiences because we have experiences, because we have a particular way that we perceive the world. But, trying to, it is a fundamentally different thing from a work, of art. And I think that's what makes, that's what makes the process of like engaging with art so to me is such like a fundamentally like human experience, is because we are trying to like reconcile that gulf between the material and the subjective.
Yeah. And it's unreconcilable, which is part of the reason that people, can pursue art for their whole life, because it's like, it's not like they reach a point and they go like, I got it. I got to the heart of human experience and now I'm good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it's always going to be this kind of, conversation. We talked about some of this stuff in the Midjourney philosophy channel, but there was one point where we were talking about, kind of, we were talking about like the existence of like, what if there was like this sort of, super consciousness. So, you could arguably say that collectively we kind of comprise this super consciousness, but it's in a different sort of sense that, say, your own consciousness, and that we have these kind of hard boundaries between these different subjective experiences. Like I can empathize with another person. I can imagine what it might be like to be this person in this situation. But there's that, there's that gulf, right, that I'll never be able to cross. That gulf of I will never be able to have another person's subjectivity. Whereas, within our own consciousness, we don't have those kind of borders between thought. And I'm trying to think where
a lot to try to get across on a Discord call.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's
like a short little span here. You're going deep.
yeah. Because I think we were talking about language too, and I think you can see art in a sense as sort of a kind of language, because there are things that you can express through words, but there are plenty of aspects of our experience that we can't express through words, and so we have to turn to other forms of symbols, other forms of imagery. There was a have you heard of the playwright Harold Pinter before?
The name rings a bell, but I'm certain I haven't read any of his work.
He has done a lot of kind of like more absurdist I don't know if you call his work like postmodern kind of stuff, but he talks about this sort of one of the processes he has for sort of like developing a play, and he goes, he starts with a particular moment, like with a particular experience. And I like that idea because it's not, I think, kind of in the age of like, we very much live in kind of an age of like plot and world building where they kind of have this, sort of perceived like primacy within like writing, within like storytelling. And I think there's been a bit of a loss sort of in the value of moments as a position to start when it comes to storytelling, to build your scaffolding out from an experience. Because I think, I think a lot of like novice writers will think like, oh, I need to have this character's history figured out. I need to have this character's history figured out. Like, I need to have the world figured out and all these sort of technical details. The history of literature for much of like human history, and those aspects are all pretty like incoherent if you start to like break them down within the work. But they don't have, the thing is they don't have to be coherent. I think, to kind of tie this back to the original topic, like
I forgot what we began.
we meandered, and that's what I was gonna say, is that I think like kind of meandering your way through a creative work is an important thing to cultivate, because you don't have to have a full idea of what you want to do before you do it. Before I knew how to like edit videos, I just had a vague idea that like, okay, this song goes well with this series. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to find a free editor on the internet and just fumble around until I have something. Because, I'm sure like when you were first kind of like learning like digital or like traditional art, do you remember kind of that feeling that you got when you first like started to like really get something, when you first really started to like have something, even though it felt like you were just kind of fumbling around?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I always felt like I was getting close to something. It was like it would always like feel like I was getting close, and then I got it, and then it would, as I would refine it, it would feel like it would slip away, I would get this moment of clarity where I realized that it was never what I was aiming for, and that like I was overlaying this kind of gauzy view of what I was working on, and it's like as I would work on it, I would gain more to it, and that insight it at first give a kind of like ability to progress the work forwards, but then like the insight would supersede the work itself. I like surpass it, and then I would be like, so at first it would be like driving it upwards, making it feel better, and then it would kind of fly past it, and then it would make it feel bad.
Yeah,
I'd be like,
it's a whole,
it's like, oh my god, I'm making something, and then I look at it and go, it's crap.
it's a whole roller coaster, because I think like whenever we like start a project, there's this, we have these like kind of random, we have this kind of like vision for it, but that vision is fussy, and once we actually, it's finishing a work is always such a strange feeling to me. I don't know, you've finished plenty of works yourself, but do you get that feeling like when you complete a work that like, well, first you have to declare that it is complete. I feel like that's the first thing. Because you can always add more. You could always.
I don't always struggle with that. I think that a lot of people, they talk about struggling with it, but there's a certain point where I intuitively know I'm like, I have done everything I can do with this, like uncached. Like this thing is fucking cached. I'm out. Like it's like the moment when you know you got to leave a party.
Yeah.
Just like, I've done everything I'm gonna do here. I'm out. I'll see you guys later. Like
Yeah.
this is the end. This is the end of this. Like
I feel that.
it's an intuitive. It's a social sense. It's not necessarily like a academic. Like there's ways of kind of academicized it, where like I'm like, okay, well, an art piece is finished when I believe I no longer have any, when I no longer feel like I have any insight into like things that need to get changed. You know, there's like, okay, yeah, I guess it's fine to like say that I have a limit and that like I can reach it, and that I know when I've reached it.
Yeah.
But better than that is like, it's just a vote.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
yeah,
done.
I think this thing's get on here.
It's done. It's done when you look at it and you say, "This is done."
Yeah, I'm done here.
Yeah. And
Things kaput. I'm out.
like I just finished up that I was only, and like there's this sense where it's like, now this is no longer something that is kind of like coming out of me. This is now something that is separate from me. This is this is an object that is not a part of me anymore. It has a part of me in it. I put a part of me in that project, but it's no longer even a project. It's a product. Yeah. But what's so interesting about that is then, do you like look back at like your old works and like kind of notice things now that like you didn't notice?
I own work all the time because I have a business that involves selling my older work. So
Yeah.
I have to have a really intimate relationship with it as like a fact of my life. And over the course of 10 years of looking at the same painting, I feel like instead of seeing more and more in it that I wish I had changed, I see like the painting, I think, as other people see it more clearly over time. The more distance I get from it, the better I feel like I have a sense of clarity over what it is I've even made. Because like I often call something done when I feel like I've lost all clarity on it. So if I no longer feel like I have any sense of what I'm looking at, and it's just colored shapes and it has nothing to do with, my original intention anymore, and it's just completely separate from me, like I'm done. And then over the course of the next few years, I might look at it again and go like, oh, damn, who made this good painting? Like, shit, am I supposed to live up to this? This is really good. Like, when did this happen? Like, stuff that I thought was trash the time I was done with it, I'd look at it like a couple of years later and go like, dang, no wonder people were spending so much money buying prints of this thing. This painting rules. Like, I didn't even realize, like, and it's not getting perspective on it over time, because like it's not artists don't get the pleasure of perspective on their own work very often. By default, you get none, I think. And then over time, if you have a healthy enough relationship with the work and you get to live with it long enough, eventually you get to get an honest look at it, and that's nice. I think it's very nice.
And it's cool too, because I think, it's looking at your work while you're still making it is kind of a different perspective than looking at it, when it is this kind of thing separate from you. Because you can turn on your kind of analysis glasses and in a way that you can't when you're still like producing it. At least that's just from what I've experienced.
My feeling is like I feel like whenever I look at it while I'm working on it, I'm flipping through these lenses. I'm looking at it entirely just as color, entirely just as value. I'm looking at just the edges, and like I flip through all these different use these different lenses, these different filters, and like that filter switching can happen pretty rapidly. And so I'm drilling down really tightly on individual dimensions of the work, which makes it really hard to get a sense of it as a whole. And
Yes.
you do that for 10 straight hours and you really have nothing like to grasp onto. Everything is this ephemeral little like twinge of like, oh, I think that the values in this part are constructed a little like awkwardly, or like this never resolved exactly quite right. And like, you know, people talk about all the time about how artists are their own worst critics in those respects, but like, it's not even a matter of like, I don't think artists even have access to the work as it's intended to be consumed to be. Like, I don't think artists are equipped with a tool that allows them to step back from the canvas far enough to actually see the canvas. You just see, at a certain point, you just see all of the pieces that constituent parts that make up the thing. You know, you have this catalog of trees and you're expected to be, and people are like, what does that forest look like? And you're like, man, how the fuck am I supposed to know? I've been like counting trees for the past 10 hours, you know, like it's not like I'm not in a position to be able to answer that question.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't weigh that to it. I don't weigh it heavily on myself, like whether or not I'm doing, this is one of the things I use as a tool to sort of relieve the pressure of feeling like I need to, like the work that I'm making. Like instead of being my own worst critic, I really try to let other people, have their own opinion about my work. And that means like, you know, looking at it through all these filters and then at some point stepping back away from it, having absolutely no perspective on it and letting other people judge it, which is, you know, harrowing in its own way, but it's fair. And that way, I'm ruminating on the ways in which I suck at art, you know?
Yeah, like there's this sense in which like at least kind of like, you know, from my own perspective, like you can never really experience your work for the first time because, you know, you made it. You can see it as, you know, you can see it as a complete piece once you've decided that it is done. But it's not the same as having, say, like a first encounter with like a Mondrian, for example. You know, there's this vantage on your own work that you'll never have. And I think, you know, it's scary. It can be at first it's scary, I'd say. Once you've got
Depends on how
experience.
long you live. I think that it's possible to live long enough to eventually get to see your work for the first time.
That's true. That's true. To be able to forget is a skill in and of itself. But thank you so much for talking with about all this stuff. Always a pleasure, and I'll stick around. But bye.
Well, thank you. Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I was feeling, one of the things I've been very critical of myself as I've been working on these studies over time, not only those initial steps where I was blocking in the geometry of the face in a way that was much more organized, but then I get this sense that I am kind of chaotically pushing around little edges to make things a little bit more accurate in terms of like the value and structure and everything. And it ends up just getting like more covered in paintbrush marks without ever feeling like it's intentional. I don't feel like I'm able to build a sense of elegant brushwork. And so one of the things I'm experimenting with is like trying to be a little bit more careful about these final steps to preserve some of this sense of geometry and planes of the face, and seeing how these transitions like carefully flow into each other. So to like obliterate a little bit of that messiness and bring it into something that feels more organized and structured by making choices of like hardening edges that aren't actually really hard, and like establishing more geometric planes to like surfaces, and then being able to carefully make little transitions either in and out of those surfaces or within them. And like, that's something I really want to experiment with more, so that the final finish of a quick rough piece like this also feels like complete and intentional and like carefully done. I want to have the feeling like I can do that efficiently. I want this like sense of efficiency and elegance to come through in the work. And I want to actually have it backed up by some level of real efficiency and elegance. So I feel like after 50 of these, I started to be able to do it. After 50 of these, I'm like beginning. I feel like I've cracked open something, and I'm like beginning to get access to that thing. But it's taken 50 paintings, 50 studies, and multiple finished paintings trying to accomplish that goal to feel like I'm beginning to make progress, which is it's a great feeling. So I'm pretty happy with this study today. I feel like this was a really good test for testing out the kind of thing that I've been wanting to test myself on. And I feel like I'm getting closer to my goals artistically with the way that this came out today compared to some of the earlier ones. And so I'm pretty happy with this overall. And I'm glad you guys got to join me. I'll be back here again next week on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And I am going to be on Twitch every day at noon Eastern. Every weekday at noon Eastern. I'm on twitch.tv. You can come say hi. You can come hear me on voice chat. And we've got a little bit of a Discord community where all of the art study thing is happening. You can find all that at huckleberry.art, along with some minor resources there. We're just building that out. And then, we're just about ready to start like taking subscriptions for anyone who wants to join the art community to get some premium content. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks, Ancient Chaos, for administrating this thing as always. Thanks everyone who came on stage. Come say hi and have conversations about stuff. You make this whole thing a pleasure to do every single week. And I will see you next week. Goodbye.